Hey guys, tonight we plunge into the muddy, bustling markets of medieval Europe, where the air hums with sizzling fat, shouting hawkers, and the clatter of wooden bowls. Picture yourself shoving through a sweaty crowd, your boots sticking to the muck, chasing the scent of something cheap and filling. This isn't the world of castles or knights in shining armor, it's the gritty underbelly, where junk food kept peasants, peddlers, and townsfolk alive. Fair warning, you probably won't survive a week on this diet without begging for a salad. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. It's always wild to see who's joining us across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in a bustling market square in a 14th century English town, where wooden stalls lean precariously under heaps of bread, meat, and steaming pots. The streets are a maze of cobble and dirt, slick with spilled ale, trampled cabbage leaves, and the occasional pig dropping. Your stomach rumbles, and the aroma of charred sausage, fresh-baked loaves, and a sharp whiff of rancid fat pulls you toward a rickety stall. This is where medieval junk food thrived, not in noble halls but in the chaotic, open-air pulse of markets. Historians know these squares as the lifeblood of medieval towns, feeding everyone from blacksmiths hammering horseshoes to beggars scrounging scraps. The chronicler Froissart described markets as noisy dens of grease and chatter, and you feel it now. Smoke stings your eyes, a sour tang of vinegar hits your nose, and the din of haggling drowns out the distant church bells tolling vespers. These stalls aren't just food stops, they're the town's social heart. You nudge past a cooper, his hands black with pitch, bartering a barrel hoop for a loaf, while a woman in a patched kirtle argues over a skewer's price, her voice sharp as a dagger. The crowd's a tapestry wool cloaks, linen caps, and the occasional velvet hood of a merchant slumming it for a quick bite. The food is fast, cheap, and often a roll of the dice. A quirky tidbit, some vendors use stale bread as plates, called trenchers, which you'd eat after the meal or toss to dogs of the poor, if you felt charitable. You spot a trencher under a customer's sausage, soggy with grease, and wonder if it's more bread than plate. Historians still argue whether trenchers were a clever way to reduce waste or just a scam to offload moldy loaves. You pause at a stall where a vendor flips small, round pasties on a griddle, their crusts golden and leaking savory steam. These are medieval hand pies stuffed with pork, onions, or peas, the great-grandparents of today's hot pockets or empanadas. You grab one, scalding your fingers, and bite in. It's flaky, salty, and gritty from coarse barley flour, with a chunk of fat that's either pork or a mystery. It's not gourmet, but it fills the void. Nearby, a kid scarfs a fried dough strip, dusted with precious sugar, a rare treat that vanishes in seconds. Your modern stomach twists at the thought of eating this daily, especially when you see a rat dart under the stall, bold as a knight. Joke number 1. If medieval junk food sounds tasty, wait till you meet the cooks been using the same apron since the Black Death. The market's chaos is a living thing. Vendors shout, carts creak, and a juggler tosses apples to cheers, nearly clipping your head. You dodge a splash of spilled ale and notice the crowd's diversity, a tanner reeking of hides, a monk in frayed robes sneaking a pasty, and a merchant's wife in fine linen, sniffing a skewer with disdain. These stalls fed all comers, uniting a town divided by class and craft. The food's variety surprises you beyond pasties. There's pottage simmering in pots, skewers of mutton, and wheels of hard cheese sliced for pennies. You try a sliver of cheese, its tang sharp enough to wake a sleeping dragon, and wonder how teeth survived this diet. But danger lurks in every bite. You spot a vendor rinsing bowls in a bucket of murky water, likely drawn from a well near the town's latrines. Flies swarm a pile of bread, and the stench of an open ditch wafts over. Hygiene was a medieval myth. Food spoiled fast, and vendors masked rancid meat with vinegar or herbs. You chew your pasty carefully, hoping it's fresh, and notice a lead-glazed pot simmering nearby, a silent threat like those in Rome's Skewer. Joke number 2. Forget food poisoning. In medieval markets, you're more likely to get a PhD in "What's that smell?" The square's rhythm pulls you deeper. Vendors pack up as dusk falls, but the market's pulse lingers. You finish your pasty, crumbs falling to the muck, and feel like a true townsfolk, hungry and hustling. This chaos-fed medieval Europe, and the alehouse's glow ahead promises greasier, louder delights. Joke number 3. In medieval markets, fast food means you eat before the rats claim your share. You step away from the market's bustling chaos, the pasty's greasy warmth still settling in your stomach, and follow a raucous din to a low-beamed alehouse tucked between sagging stalls. The air inside is thick with smoke, sweat, and the tang of spilled ale, and you squeeze through a crowd to grab a wooden cup of something hot and savory. This is the medieval alehouse, the town's grab-and-go hub, where laborers, travelers, and ne'er-do-wells scarf greasy snacks faster than you can say, "Another round." You find a wobbly stool, your cup brimming with pottage, and dive into the noisy, grimy world of medieval fast food, where every bite's a gamble and every sip a ritual. The alehouse is a riot of sound. Shouts, laughter, and the clatter of spoons against bowls drown out the market's fading hum. You're shoulder to shoulder with a blacksmith, his hands smudged with soot, and a weaver giggling over her ale, her apron stained with dye. The counter's a scarred slab of oak, littered with crumbs and sticky rings, while a harried alewife ladles pottage from a cauldron blackened by years of fire. These alehouses were medieval lifelines, serving quick meals to townsfolk too busy or poor for home cooking. Historians note that by the 13th century, alehouses dotted every English town, feeding the masses with cheap, filling fare. The poet Langland, in Piers Plowman, mocked them as dens of gluttony, and you get why the air is heavy with grease, and the floor's a mosaic of spilled stew and straw. You scoop your pottage, a watery mix of oats, leeks, and a questionable meat scrap, and wince at its gritty texture, like eating a muddy puddle. It's warm but bland, saved only by a pinch of salt the alewife sprinkled in. The blacksmith dunks a chunk of bread into his bowl, sauce dripping down his beard, while the weaver munches a fried pasty, its crust flaking onto the counter. Alehouses weren't just for drinking, they were medieval diners, offering snacks like pasties, pottage, and cheese to pair with cloudy ale. A quirky tidbit, some alehouses kept tally sticks, notched to track customers' tabs, often leading to brawls when bills came due. You check your imaginary purse, hoping you're not racking up a debt. Historians still argue whether tally sticks were fair or just a way to fleece tipsy patrons. The food here is hearty but heavy, meant to fill fast. You spot a tray of rissoles, small fried balls of minced meat and herbs, and custards, eggy tarts baked in clay pots. The alewife offers tripe, stewed intestines that smell like regret, which a drunk nearby slurps with gusto. You stick to your pottage, though a whiff of rancid fat from the cauldron makes your eyes water. The crowd's a mixstanders, carpenters, even a monk sneaking a pasty, his vows no match for hunger. Alehouses were social hubs, where gossip flowed as freely as ale. You overhear a farmer gripe about taxes, his bull half-eaten, and realize this place is the town's pulse, grimy, loud, alive. But eating here is a risk. You notice the alewife rinsing bowls in a bucket of murky water, likely from a ditch near the market's latrines. Flies buzz over a pile of rissoles, and a lead-glazed pot simmers on the fire, its contents bubbling with a faint metallic sheen, much like those you've heard of in Rome's Subura. Hygiene was a medieval afterthought. Open sewers ran outside, and rats scurried underfoot, eyeing your pottage. Spoilage was common. Vendors masked bad meat with herbs, and pottage often hid stale grains or worse. You eat cautiously, dodging a gritty bit that might be pebble or bone. Joke number 1. If the pottage doesn't get you, the alehouse's dishwater will. The alehouse's chaos is its charm. You watch the alewife juggle orders, barking at a boy to fetch more ale from the cellar. A group of laborers play dice, their shouts drowning out a minstrel strumming a lute in the corner. Graffiti scratched into the counter reads, "God save the ale." A prayer or a boast, and you laugh, feeling the place's rough warmth. Food here binds strangers. Two weavers share a custard. A tanner offers a bite of tripe to his friend. You recall the market's trenchers, and spot one under a customer's pasty, soggy and half-eaten, destined for a dog or beggar. You finish your pottage, the bowl's dregs cold and gluey, and wipe your hands on your cloak, blending into the crowd. The alehouse's glow feels like a grimy hug, its food a lifeline for a town always on the move. As you step toward the door, the scent of fresh baked bread wafts from a nearby stall, pulling you toward the medieval staple that fed every soul. Joke number 2, forget fine dining. In an alehouse, you're lucky if the stool doesn't collapse mid-bite. The Sabura's rats and lead pots feel distant, but the alehouse's risks are just as real. You dodge a splash of spilled ale and smile at the weaver, who raises her cup in a tipsy toast. This is medieval junk food, fast, cheap, and shared, a taste of survival in every gritty spoonful. Joke number 3, in an alehouse, fresh means the flies only landed this morning, not yesterday. You step out of the alehouse's smoky clamor, the pottage's gritty aftertaste clinging to your tongue, and weave back into the market's muddy bustle. A warm, yeasty scent slices through the grease and ale, pulling you toward a small bakery stall where loaves are stacked like a fortress wall. You grab a hunk of coarse bread, its crust cracking under your fingers, and settle against the cart to chew the medieval staple that fueled every peasant, peddler, and pilgrim. Bread was the heart of the town's diet, the cornerstone of its junk food scene, and you're about to taste the gritty, chewy lifeblood that kept medieval Europe trudging through muck and hunger. The bakery stall hums with quiet purpose, a stark contrast to the alehouse's rowdy din. You watch the baker, a broad-shouldered woman with flour-dusted arms, knead dough on a scarred wooden table, her movements steady as a heartbeat. The air is thick with flour motes, catching the torchlight like tiny stars, and the oven's heat washes over you, heavy with the promise of warmth. Bread wasn't just food in medieval towns, it was survival itself. Historians note that by the 13th century, bread accounted for over half the calories in most Europeans' diets, with towns relying on communal ovens to feed the masses. The chronicler John of Troclo recorded bread shortages sparking riots in 1315, and you feel the weight your loaf, a dense maslin of rye and barley, is heavy as a cobblestone, its chew a reminder of hunger's ever-present shadow. You tear into it, the crust tough and the crumbs speckled with grit from the millstone. It's bland, slightly sour from natural yeast, and you wince as a pebble catches your teeth. Medieval flour was rarely sifted clean. Bread came in a hierarchy: pandemain, fine white loaves for lords; cheat, a middling wheat-rye mix for townsfolk; and horse bread, coarse bran-heavy stuff for the poor, sometimes bulked with peas or acorns. Your maslin is a peasant's loaf, cheap at a penny, sold by weight under strict town laws. A quirky tidbit: bakers caught shorting weight faced the pillory, where crowds pelted them with their own stale loaves. You check your bread for suspicious lightness, hoping it's honest flour and not a baker's trick. Historians still argue whether such cheating was rampant or exaggerated by angry townsfolk blaming bakers for empty bellies. The crowd around you grabs loaves with urgency. Laborers stuff them into sacks. A mother breaks one for her kids, their faces bright with relief. Bread was medieval junk food, fast, portable, and universal, eaten plain, dunked in pottage, or used as a trencher like those in the alehouse. You see a tanner tear his loaf, crumbs falling to the muck, and a monk tuck one under his robe, his piety bending under hunger's pull. Most townsfolk didn't bake at home. Wood was scarce, and ovens were communal, often owned by lords who charged a fee. You notice the baker's apprentice, a scrawny boy, hauling wood to stoke the oven, his face red from the heat. The flour likely came from river-powered mills, but floods or drought could halt them, leaving towns to starve or riot. Bread's role went beyond filling bellies. It was a social anchor. You watch a group of weavers share a loaf, passing it hand to hand, their chatter a soft hum over the market's din. A beggar lingers nearby, eyeing crumbs, and the baker tosses him a burned heel, a small mercy in a hard world. Graffiti scratched into a nearby card reads, "Bread or blood?" a raw cry from a town where hunger fueled unrest. You recall the alehouse's soggy trenchers and realize bread was everywhere, meals, plates, alms for the poor. Your maslin feels like a relic, each bite tying you to the town's pulse. Joke number 1. If this bread's tough, medieval dentists were tougher, just don't ask for a mirror. The risks are baked into every loaf. You notice the baker's flour sack, likely milled with stones that grind dirt, or worse, into the dough. Archaeological digs show medieval teeth worn to stubs from such grit, a dental nightmare you're tasting now. Spoilage was a constant threat. Damp loaves grew mold, and bakers sometimes stretched flour with sawdust, chalk, or even ground bones, a trick that could sicken a village. You chew cautiously, dodging a gritty bit that's either pebble or regret. A lead-glazed pot simmers nearby, used to boil water for dough. Its poison a silent guest like those in Rome's Skewer. Joke number 2. In medieval towns, artisan bread means it's got rocks, bugs, and a side of character. The bakery's rhythm is relentless: knead, shape, bake, sell. You watch the baker slap dough into the oven with a wooden peel, her face glistening with sweat as she pulls out steaming loaves. The crowd flows, some heading to alehouses for pottage, others to meat stalls for skewers, all clutching bread like a shield against hunger. You finish your loaf, crumbs dusting your cloak, and feel like a true peasant, hungry, resilient, grounded by this gritty staple. Bread fed medieval Europe, from plowmen to priests, and its echo lives in every rustic sourdough today. As you move deeper into the market, the scent of simmering pottage wafts from a stall, promising a slurp of the peasant's daily sludge. Joke number 3. Forget gluten-free diets. In medieval markets, you're thrilled if your bread's just gluten and not a geology exam. You wander away from the bakery's warm glow, the maslin's gritty chew still heavy in your jaw, and slip back into the market's muddy bustle. A savory, earthy scent cuts through the yeasty haze, pulling you toward a stall where a vendor stirs a steaming cauldron, its contents bubbling with leeks and grain. You grab a wooden bowl of pottage, the peasant's universal slurry, its warmth seeping into your hands, and lean against a cart to slurp the medieval junk food that filled every belly, from plowman to pauper. Pottage was the town's daily fuel, a cheap, watery mush that defined survival, and you're about to taste its bland, gritty essence. The stall is a quiet hub in the market's chaos, surrounded by weary townsfolk clutching bowls like lifelines. You stand among laborers in patched cloaks, a widow with a frayed shawl, and a boy eyeing your pottage with hungry eyes. The vendor, an old woman with gnarled hands, ladles the slurry from a cauldron blackened by years of fire, her face etched with market grime. Pottage was medieval Europe's go-to meal, a catch-all stew of oats, barley, or peas boiled with whatever was cheap: leeks, cabbage, maybe a bone for flavor. Historians note that pottage was a dietary staple, often eaten twice daily by the poor, as recorded in manor accounts from 14th century England. The poet Chaucer, in the Canterbury Tales, mocked its dullness, calling it fit for swine. And you get why your bowl's a grayish mush, flecked with green, its taste as exciting as dishwater. You slurp a spoonful, the pottage lukewarm and gluey, with a faint oniony tang and a gritty crunch that might be grain or dirt. It's not awful, just joyless, like eating a chore. The laborer next to you scoops his with a bread crust, sauce smearing his chin, while the widow sips hers slowly, savoring each drop. Pottage's beauty was its flexibility. Richer folk added meat or herbs, but here it's basic, stretched with water to feed more mouths. A quirky tidbit: some peasants tossed in nettles or dandelions, believing they warded off sickness, though they mostly added a bitter kick. You taste a sharp note in your bowl and hope it's not weeds. Historians still argue whether such foraged greens were common, or a desperate bid to avoid starvation. The crowd eats in near silence, a stark contrast to the alehouse's din, their urgency speaking of hunger's grip. Pottage was cheap, often free for the poorest, doled out by churches or lords to keep the peace. You notice the vendor's pot, nearly empty, but the line doesn't shrink. Hunger outpaces supply in this town. A girl trades a chipped bowl for a serving, her hands trembling, and you recall the bakery's burnt heel given to a beggar. Pottage was survival, often the only meal for those too poor for bread alone. The market's grain stores, like those feeding the baker, supplied pottage too, but bad harvests could turn this slurry into a memory, sparking riots or worse. Eating pottage is a grim ritual. You stand in the muck, dodging a stray dog sniffing for spills, your bowl wobbling as a cart rumbles past. Hygiene's a lost cause. A vendor's cauldron hasn't been scrubbed in years, and flies land on your pottage, unfazed by your swatting. Lead-glazed pots, like those you saw in the alehouse, simmer nearby, their poison seeping into the mush, a silent threat echoing Rome's Subura. Spoilage was a risk. Pottage left too long bred mold or worse, and bad grain could sicken a village. You slurp carefully, scanning for odd lumps, and wonder how anyone lived on this. Joke number 1. Pottage is so bland, you'd trade your soul for a pinch of salt and a toothbrush. Pottage's role went beyond filling bellies. It was a shared struggle. You watch a group of laborers pass a single bowl, their quiet chatter a flicker of defiance against hunger. A man offers a spoonful to the boy, who grins like it's a feast, and you realize pottage bound this town, much like bread did. Graffiti on a nearby stall reads, "Pottage keeps us." A raw truth scratched in desperation. You recall the alehouse's trenchers, soggy with stew, and see pottage everywhere. Bowls, charity, even slopped into troughs for pigs when it turned. The stall's rhythm is steady: stir, ladle, serve, repeat. You notice the vendor's hands, rough from years of market toil, and the boy fetching water from a dubious well, its murk a recipe for trouble. The market's chaos swirls, sausages sizzle nearby. A minstrel strums, but this corner feels heavy, shadowed by need. Your pottage grows cold, its dregs a gluey paste, and you wipe your mouth on your cloak, blending into the crowd. Pottage fed medieval Europe's soul, a lifeline for those scraping by, and its echo lingers in every humble soup today. As you move deeper into the market, the scent of roasting meat wafts from a stall, promising a greasy taste of medieval indulgence. Joke number 2. In medieval towns, pottage is the meal you eat when even the rats say, "Pass." The Subura's lead pots feel like a distant cousin, but the market's risks are just as real. You dodge a splash of spilled pottage and smile at the boy, who's already eyeing another bowl. This is medieval junk food, cheap, shared, and stubborn, a taste of resilience in every watery slurp. Joke number 3. Forget gourmet. In this market, you're a chef if your pottage doesn't come with a side of gravel. You drift away from the pottage stall, the watery slurry's bland weight settling in your gut, and slip back into the market's bustling chaos. A smoky, meaty aroma hooks you, sharp with char and fat, pulling you toward a vendor's brazier where skewers sizzle over glowing coals. You grab a skewer of glistening meat, its heat stinging your fingers, and lean against a muddy cart to bite into the greasy delight that lured medieval townsfolk from their daily pulse and pottage. Street meat was the market's indulgent junk food, a rare treat for most, and you're about to taste the savory, questionable allure that made it a crowd favorite. The stall's a fiery hub, its brazier spitting sparks into the dusk, drawing a crowd of hungry faces, laborers, weavers, even a giggling kid eyeing your skewer. The vendor, a wiry man with soot-streaked hands, flips meat with a practiced flick, his shouts cutting through the market's din. Meat was a luxury in medieval diets, reserved for feast days or those with coins to spare, as most peasants lived on grains and greens. Historians note that by the 14th century, towns like London relied on butchers' guilds to supply pork, mutton, and poultry, but market stalls often peddled cheaper cuts or worse. The chronicler William Langland, in Piers Plowman, sneered at greasy hawkers selling dubious meat, and you get why your skewer, labeled mutton, has a chewy, fatty texture that's either sheep or a mystery guest. You bite in, the meat juicy but tough, spiced with costly pepper and a hint of vinegar to mask its age. Grease drips down your chin, and you dodge a fly landing on your skewer, a reminder of the market's grime. Street meat came in many forms: sausages stuffed with pork and sage, rissoles of minced mutton, or skewers like yours, grilled fast for quick sales. A quirky tidbit, some vendors sold hedgehog meat, Likely rabbit or squirrel passed off as exotic to gullible buyers. You chew slower, wondering if your mutton's got a bushy tail, and hope it's at least fresh. Historians still argue whether such tricks were common, or just tall tales spread by rival butchers. The crowd around you devours their meat with gusto, crumbs and grease mingling in the muck. A laborer tears into a sausage, sauce smearing his cloak, while a woman haggles for a cheaper skewer, her kids tugging at her skirts. Meat stalls were social magnets, where townsfolk lingered to gossip or flirt over a rare treat. You notice the vendor's boy, barely tall enough to fan the coals, collecting pennies in a clay cup. The meat's grilled over oak, giving it a smoky edge, but its freshness is dubious. Flies swarm a pile of raw cuts, and the stench of a nearby ditch wafts over. Hygiene wasn't a medieval strong suit. Vendors rinsed skewers in murky water, and rats eyed the scraps. You recall the pottage stall's flies and realize the risks are just as real here. Eating street meat is a gamble. You spot a lead-glazed pan catching drippings under the brazier, its poison a silent threat like those in the alehouse. Spoilage was rampant. Vendors stretched meat with fat or offal, and warm weather turned cuts rancid fast. You chew cautiously, scanning for gristle or worse, and think of the maslin's grit, another tooth wrecker. Parasites, common in undercooked pork, were a hidden plague, as medieval butchers rarely inspected their stock. A man nearby coughs, his skewer half-eaten, and you hope it's just the smoke. Joke number 1. In medieval markets, fresh meat means the flies haven't filed for ownership yet. The stall's rhythm is hypnotic: flip, sizzle, serve, repeat. You watch the vendor toss a scrap to a stray dog, who gulps it down, tail wagging. Meat was a status symbol. Even in junk food form, lords ate whole boars, while peasants savored a skewer like it was a feast. Graffiti on a nearby post reads, "Mutton for might." A boast or a prayer, scratched beside a crude knife sketch. You overhear a weaver brag about snagging a sausage, her friend laughing, and feel the market's pulse-meat brought joy, however fleeting, to a town of pottage slurpers. The Sabura's garum-soaked skewers feel like distant kin, but this market's meat is pure medieval, greasy, bold, and shared. You finish your skewer, licking grease from your fingers, and dodge a cartwheel that nearly clips your foot. The crowd surges, some heading to bakeries for bread to pair with their meat, others to alehouses for ale. Street meat fed the town's hunger for flavor and connection, a rare escape from the daily grind. As you move deeper into the market, the scent of honeyed pastries wafts from a stall, promising a sweet twist on medieval junk food. Joke number 2. Forget fine dining. In medieval towns, a skewer is your ticket to feeling like a lord for 5 minutes. The market's chaos wraps you, its meat stalls a fiery heart in the muck. You realize these skewers, like pulse or bread, were more than food. They were moments of defiance against a hard life. You wipe your hands on your cloak, blending into the crowd, and feel like a true townsfolk, chasing the next bite. Joke number 3. In medieval markets, the only thing tougher than the meat is the guy who's still chewing it. You slip away from the meat stall's smoky brazier, the skewer's greasy spice still tingling on your lips, and weave through the market's bustling crowd. A sweet, warm scent catches you, like a flicker of comfort in the muddy chaos, drawing you to a small stand where a vendor drizzles honey over golden pastries. You grab a sticky treat, its warmth coating your fingers, and settle against a cart to savor the rare sugary delights that thrilled medieval townsfolk. Sweets were a scarce indulgence in this world of pottage and maslin, the market's sweetest junk food, and you're about to taste the honeyed escape that made hearts race and purses lighten. The stall is a beacon in the market's grime, its trays of pastries glowing under torchlight, drawing a crowd of wide-eyed kids, giggling weavers, and even a merchant sniffing the air like a hound. The vendor, a plump woman with quick hands, shapes dough into small rounds, fries them crisp, and dunks them in honey syrup scented with costly cinnamon. These are wafers, thin, crispy sweets pressed in iron molds, or crisp bells, dough curls fried and honeyed, medieval cousins to donuts. You bite into your crispel, the crunch giving way to a burst of sweetness, Though a grain of sand from the flour catches your teeth, medieval purity was a myth. Sweets were rare, sugar was a lord's luxury, and honey, pricier than ale, made these treats a splurge. Historians note that by the 14th century, honey was a valued trade good, often taxed heavily, as seen in English guild records. The poet Gower, in Mirar de El Ami, called honeyed sweets sinful temptations, and you get why your crisple's practically divine. The stall's offerings are modest but irresistible. You spot leche, flat cakes layered with honey and nuts, and pain ragout, a chewy mix of honey, ginger, and breadcrumbs, like a medieval energy bar. Some treats are sprinkled with precious sugar, imported from distant lands, or studded with dried figs, a nod to wealthier tables. A quirky tidbit, some vendors sold saint cakes, sweets shaped like holy figures for pilgrims, believed to carry blessings. You eye a cross-shaped wafer, wondering if it's sacred or just a sales pitch, and stick to your crisple. Historians still argue whether saint cakes were devotional or a clever way to fleece pious travelers. The crowd savors each bite like a ritual. You watch a kid lick honey from his fingers, his grin brighter than the torches, while a weaver shares a leche with her friend, their laughter soft. Sweets were a social spark, turning strangers into fleeting allies. The vendor's daughter, barely tall enough to reach the tray, stacks pastries, dodging a stray dog sniffing for scraps. Honey's heated in a bronze pot, its steam mingling with the market smoke, but you spot a lead-glazed rim, a silent risk like those in the alehouse. Hygiene's shaky flies buzz over the sweets, and the vendor swats them with a rag that's seen better days. You nibble cautiously, hoping your treat's free of grit or worse. Eating sweets is messy but joyful. You juggle your crisple, honey dripping onto your cloak, and chuckle as a laborer nearby curses a sticky smear on his sleeve. The stall's a magnet for gossip. A woman whispers about a night's scandal, her wafer half-eaten, while two kids play tag, dodging customers. Graffiti on a nearby post reads, "Honey heals," a hopeful scratch beside a crude heart. You recall the pottage stall's grim silence and feel the contrast. Sweets brought lightness, however brief, to the market's grind. Joke number 1. If honey's sticky, medieval gossip's stickier. Just don't get caught in the rumor mill. The risks aren't just sticky fingers. You notice the vendor's flour sack, likely milled with stones that grind dirt into the dough, like the Maslin's grit. Medieval teeth, worn by such flour, tell a grim story in archaeological digs. Honey could mask stale dough or rancid nuts, and warm weather turns sweets into fly traps. You take another bite, savoring the cinnamon but scanning for surprises. The market's open ditches and roaming rats don't inspire confidence, and you hope the vendor's rag didn't double as a mop. Lead-glazed pots, simmering nearby, add a toxic shadow, echoing Rome's Subura. Joke number 2. In medieval markets, fresh sweets means the flies haven't started a dynasty yet. The stall's warmth feels like a fleeting hug. You watch the vendor haggle with a merchant, her laugh echoing as she tosses an extra crisple for charm. Sweets were tied to joy weddings, fairs, or bribes to calm kids. A man buys a stack of leche for his family, his smile soft, and you realize these treats were rare moments of escape. The Subura's globuli feel like kin, but these pastries are medieval, delicate, defiant, shared. You finish your crisple, licking the last honey drop, and feel a sugar buzz that's worth the grit. As you step back into the market, the crowd pulls you along. The scent of cloudy ale wafts from an alehouse, hinting at the liquid lunch that paired with every medieval bite. The market's chaos wraps you, its sweets stall a bright spark in the muck. You wipe your hands, blending into the flow, and feel like a true townsfolk, chasing the next taste. Joke number 3. Forget dessert menus. In medieval markets, you follow the honey to find your happy ending. You wander away from the sweet stall, the crisple's honeyed glow still warming your fingers, and slip back into the market's muddy flow. A sharp, malty scent cuts through the sugary haze, pulling you toward an alehouse where a crowd clutches wooden tankards, their laughter spilling into the dusk. You snag a cup of cloudy ale, its froth sloshing, and lean against the cart to sip the liquid lunch that paired with every medieval junk food bite. Ale was the market's lifeblood, the cheap, boozy fuel that kept townsfolk trudging through long days and rowdy nights. And you're about to taste the sour, yeasty brew that made every pulse and pasty go down easier. The alehouse's open doorway hums with chaos, shouts, clinks, and the strum of a minstrel's lute drown out the market's fading din. You squeeze past the table of carpenters, their cloaks dusted with sawdust, and find a spot near the counter, elbow to elbow with a weaver slurring her tales. The alewife, a sharp-eyed woman with a stained apron, pours ale from a barrel, her hands swift despite the crowd's demands. Ale wasn't just a drink in medieval towns, it was a necessity, safer than water and cheaper than wine. Historians note that by the 14th century, ale was consumed daily by all classes in England, with some towns brewing over 500 gallons weekly, as recorded in guild ledgers. The poet Chaucer, in the Canterbury Tales, poked fun at ale-soaked tavern-goers, and you get why your tankard's brew is murky, sour, and strong enough to loosen tongues. You take a sip, the ale tart and yeasty, with a watery bite that's more practical than pleasant. It's small ale, low-alcohol stuff brewed for everyday drinking, often flavored with herbs like bog myrtle for a bitter kick. Your modern palate recalls, but the carpenter next to you downs his like it's nectar, breadcrumbs stuck in his beard from a pasty. Ale paired with everything: pottage, skewers, even the crisp spells you just ate. A quirky tidbit, some alehouses served braggart ale spiked with honey and spices, passed off as fancy but often masking spoiled brew. You sniff your tankard, hoping it's plain small ale, not a sugary cover-up. Historians still argue whether braggart was a treat or a scam to unload bad batches. The alehouse's menu is simple but tempting: bowls of pottage, sausages, and crusty bread to soak up the brew. You spot a tray of rissoles, like those in the alehouse you visited, and hard-boiled eggs, cracked open by a drunk who misses his mouth. The alewife offers stewed eels, their fishy tang clashing with the ale's malt, but you stick to your drink, its sourness cutting through the honey you tasted earlier. The crowd's a mixed anners, pilgrims, even a clerk in a frayed robe, his tankard wobbling. Alehouses were medieval social hubs, where food and drink fueled gossip, deals, and fights. You overhear a farmer rant about crop failures, his ale half spilled, and feel the town's pulse boozy, gritty, alive. Drinking here is a gamble. You notice the alewife rinsing tankards in a bucket of murky water, likely from a well near the market's ditches. Flies buzz over a spilled puddle of ale, and a lead-glazed jug sits on the counter, its poison a silent guest, much like the pots in the pottage stall. Medieval ale wasn't always safe: bad barley or dirty vats bred sour brews, and some alewives added chalk or soot to stretch profits, risking sickness or fines. You sip cautiously, dodging a floating speck, and recall the Maslin's grit, another medieval hazard. Joke number 1. If the ale doesn't knock you out, the extras in it might send you to bed for a week. The alehouse's walls tell tales: graffiti scratches out bets, curses, and a crude drawing of a tankard. You spot God's ale, God's grace, a prayer or a boast, and smile, imagining the debts racked up here, like the tally sticks from before. Ale-bound Strangersa weaver shares her tankard with a stranger. A tanner buys a round for his mates, their laughter slurred. You recall the pottage stall's shared bowls and see ale's power, turning a hard day into a shared blur. The Sebur's Pascha feels like a cousin, but this ale is medieval, raw, communal, essential. The alehouse's rhythm is relentless: pour, serve, shout, repeat. You watch the alewife bark at a boy to fetch more barley, her voice cutting through the minstrel's tune. The crowd sways, some heading to meat stalls for skewers, others lingering over pottage, all fueled by ale. You finish your tankard, the dregs sour but warming, and wipe your mouth on your cloak, blending into the chaos. Ale was medieval junk food's partner, making every bite bearable, every night brighter. As you step toward the market, the crowd's flow pulls you deeper, where eating on the move defines the town's hungry pace. Joke number 2. In medieval alehouses, happy hour, means you're still upright after 3 tankards. The market's muck and flies swirl around, but the alehouse's glow lingers. You realize ale wasn't just a drink, it was the town's spirit, pairing with every pulse and crisple, binding strangers in every slurred toast. You dodge a cartwheel and grin at the weaver, who raises her empty tankard. This is medieval junk food, fast, shared, and stubborn, a taste of life in every sour sip. Joke number 3, forget sommeliers. In medieval markets, you're a pro if your ale doesn't come with a side of ditch water. You stumble out of the alehouse, the sour kick of small ale still buzzing on your tongue, and plunge back into the market's muddy chaos. The crowd sweeps you along, their cloaks stained with pottage and grease, all munching as they dodge carts and hawkers. You grab a crust of bread from a passing vendor, its edge hard but warm, and join the flow, chewing while sidestepping a puddle of spilled ale. This is medieval eating on the move, scarfing junk food in the market's crush, where no one stops for tables or manners. The town's pulse is in every hurried bite, and you're about to taste the restless rhythm that defined its daily grind. The market streets are a living dining hall, where food's as mobile as the people. You weave past a woman balancing a bowl of pottage, slurping without breaking stride, and a laborer gnawing a sausage skewer, grease shining on his chin. Eating on the move was medieval necessity. Most townsfolk lived in cramped hovels with no hearths, so markets became kitchens. Historians note that by the 14th century, urban markets like those in York or London fed thousands daily, with vendors outnumbering bakers 10 to 1, as seen in town records. The chronicler John Gower grumbled about folk eating in the mire, and you feel the muck under your boots, the smoke in your eyes, and the clatter of carts drowning out a minstrel's tune. You bite your bread, its grit a familiar echo of the maslin from the bakery, and dodge a cartwheel that nearly clips your foot. The crowd's a mix, weavers rushing to looms, tanners reeking of hides, and kids darting between legs, clutching stolen crisp bells. Food's everywhere. A man tears a pasty, crumbs falling to the dirt. A girl munches pickled herring, its fishy tang sharp in the air. These snacks are cheap, portable, and meant for survival. A quirky tidbit, some townsfolk carried scran bags, cloth pouches for stashing scraps, like medieval Tupperware. You pat your imaginary bag, wishing you'd saved some of that honeyed wafer. Historians still argue whether scran bags were common or a quirk of the hungriest peddlers. The market's chaos is a dance, vendors shout, customers haggle, and pigs root through spilled pottage. You pass a stall selling rissoles, like those in the alehouse, now wrapped in bread for quick eating. You grab one, the meat patty warm and spiced, but a gristly bit makes you pause. Enders stretched ingredients with fat or offal, just like the skewer's mystery meat. Lead-glazed pots, simmering nearby, cast a shadow, their poison seeping into fried snacks, a risk you've seen from pottage to ale. Spoilage was a constant threat. Warm weather turned pasties rancid, and flies swarmed uncovered bread. You chew cautiously, dodging a fly on your rissole, and think of the pottage's murky water. Joke number 1. In medieval markets, fast food means you're racing the rats to your lunch. Eating on the move isn't just practical, it's social. You overhear a group of laborers joking about their lord, passing a loaf as they walk, their laughter a bright note in the muck. A woman offers a bite of her herring to a friend, their chatter weaving through the crowd's din. Food binds the market, turning strangers into fleeting allies. You spot graffiti on a stall. Eat or be eaten. A grim jest scratched beside a knife mark. The Sabura's street eaters feel like kin, but this market's pace is medieval, hurried, hungry, raw. You recall the alehouse's shared tankards and see the same spirit here, in every passed crust or stolen crisple. The risks are woven into the rush. You notice a vendor rinsing bowls in a ditch, the water murkier than the ale you drank. Flies hop from muck to a pile of sausages, and the stench of open latrines mingles with sizzling fat. Hygiene was a myth townsfolk ate where they stood, crumbs feeding rats and dogs. Your rissole tastes fine, but you wonder if it's pork or hedgehog, and pray it's not spoiled. Parasites, common in bad meat, were a silent plague, and lead from pots added a toxic bite, like in Rome's Skewer. A man nearby retches, his pasty dropped, and you hope it's just bad ale. Joke number 2, in medieval towns, street food means you're one bite away from a sermon or a sickbed. The market's rhythm pulls you deeper. Vendors hawk cheese, eggs, and pottage, their cries a chaotic choir. You finish your bread, licking grease from your fingers, and feel like a true townsfolk, hungry, hustling, alive. Eating on the move was the market's heartbeat, fueling weavers who wove cloth, tanners who cured hides, and dreamers chasing a better day. You pass a pottage stall, its cauldron steaming, and a sweet stand with honeyed leche, but your mind turns to the peasant's daily scraps, the bare-bones diet you're about to explore. The market's muck clings to your boots, but its pulse wraps you tight. You realize eating on the go wasn't just survival, it was the town's spirit, shared in every hurried bite. You dodge a pig rooting through crumbs and grin at a kid who's snagged a risole from an unwashed tray. This is medieval junk food, fast, gritty, communal, a taste of life in every rushed chew. Joke number 3, forget dining etiquette. In medieval markets, you're a pro if you eat without tripping into a ditch. You weave through the market's bustling crowd, the risole's greasy spice fading as you brush crumbs from your cloak, and feel the town's restless pulse in every hurried step. The glow of torches dims, and your gaze falls on a weary figure hunched against a stall, clutching a cracked bowl of watery gruel. This is the world of the medieval peasant, where junk food wasn't a treat but a lifeline, scraped from scraps and grit. You pause near a vendor ladling out thin pottage, its steam barely rising, and accept a bowl, its warmth faint in your hands. You're diving into the meager diet that kept the town's poorest alive, a daily grind of pulse and stale crusts, and you're about to taste the stark hunger that defined their days. The stall's a somber corner in the market's chaos, surrounded by hollow-eyed townsfolk, laborers in tattered cloaks, widows with sunken cheeks, and a boy clutching a bowl for his kin. The vendor, an old man with a limp, stirs a cauldron with a wooden paddle, his face etched with years of toil. Pottage was the peasant's mainstay, a thin mush of oats, barley, or peas boiled with scraps like cabbage or fish heads. Historians know it as the backbone of the medieval poor's diet, often their only meal, as seen in 14th century manor records showing lords doling out grain to tenants. The chronicler William Langland, in Piers Plowman, called pottage the poor's punishment. And you get why. Your bowl's a grey sludge, flecked with wilted greens, its taste as lively as mud. You slurp a spoonful, the pottage cold and gluey, with a bitter tang from stale grain or foraged weeds. It's not food, it's endurance, barely quelling the gnaw in your gut. The laborer next to you scoops his with a crust, crumbs falling to the muck, while the widow sips hers, her eyes distant. The peasant's diet was pottage, stale bread, and whatever could be scavenged onion ends, moldy cheese rinds, or bones boiled to nothing. A quirky tidbit, some peasants ate trencher soup, broth made from soaking old bread plates, a desperate bid to stretch scraps. You taste a chalky note in your pottage and hope it's not trencher runoff. Historians still argue whether such practices were widespread or myths born of famine tales. The crowd eats in grim silence, their urgency a testament to hunger's grip. Pottage was often free, doled out by churches or lords to keep peasants from revolt, but it wasn't enough. You notice the vendor's cauldron, nearly empty, yet the line grows. Hunger outpaces charity. A girl trades a broken spoon for a serving, her hands trembling, and you recall the bakery's burnt heel tossed to a beggar. The town's grain stores, like those feeding the maslin you ate, supplied pottage, but bad harvests turned bowls empty, sparking riots or starvation. Peasants sold their dole for ale or meat, leaving them hungrier, a cycle as old as the market's muck. Eating here is a joyless task. You stand in the dirt, dodging a stray dog sniffing your bowl, your pottage wobbling as a cart rumbles past. Hygiene's a fantasy, the vendor's cauldron's crusted with years of grime, and flies land on your slurry, unmoved by your swatting. Lead-glazed pots, like those in the alehouse, simmer nearby, their poison seeping into the mush, a silent threat echoing Rome's Skewer. Spoiled grain or bad water could sicken a village, and pottage left too long bred mold or worms. You slurp cautiously, scanning for lumps, and wonder how anyone survived this. Joke number 1. Pottage is so grim, you trade it for a rock. At least rocks don't spoil. Pottage bound the poor, a shared struggle in every bowl. You watch a group pass a single serving, their quiet chatter a spark of defiance against want. A man offers a spoonful to the boy, who grins like it's a feast, and you see resilience in their hunger. Graffiti on a stall reads, "Pottage or death." A raw cry scratched in desperation, echoing the bakeries. Bread or blood? You recall the alehouse's shared tankards and see pottage's power, uniting the towns forgotten in every watery sip. The skewer's pulse feels like a cousin, but this pottage is medieval, bleak, stubborn, vital. The stall's rhythm is relentless: stir, ladle, serve, repeat. You notice the vendor's hands, rough from decades of market toil, and the boy fetching water from a well that smells of ditch. The market's chaos swirls, sausages sizzle, a juggler tosses apples, but this corner's heavy, shadowed by need. Your pottage grows cold, its dregs a gluey paste, and you wipe your mouth on your cloak, blending into the crowd. Pottage fed the town's soul, a lifeline for those scraping by, and its echo lingers in every humble broth today. As you move deeper into the market, the scent of noble delicacies wafts from a finer stall, promising a contrast to this peasant's sludge. Joke number 2. In medieval towns, pottage is the meal you eat when even the pigs say, "No thanks." The market's muck clings to your boots, but the poor's quiet strength wraps you tight. You realize pottage wasn't just food, it was survival, shared in every grim slurp. You dodge a cart and nod at the boy, who's eyeing another bowl. This is medieval junk food, bare, gritty, human, a taste of defiance in every spoon. Joke number 3. Forget gourmet. In medieval markets, you're a chef if your pottage doesn't come with a side of despair. You shuffle away from the pottage stall, the watery gruel's bitter weight lingering in your gut, and drift back into the market's bustling flow. The crowd parts, revealing a finer stall draped in dyed cloth, its counter gleaming under bronze lamps. A whiff of exotic spices, saffron, ginger cuts through the market's muck, drawing you toward the world of medieval nobles, where junk food becomes a flaunt of wealth. You snag a small, overpriced candied fruit, its sweetness sharp on your tongue, and lean against a cart to compare the elite's delicacies with the peasant's grim pulse. This stall's a gilded island in the market's chaos, and you're about to taste the divide that split medieval tables. The stall's a spectacle, less gritty than the alehouse but dripping with status. Polished trays shine under lamplight, and the vendor, a sleek man in a velvet cap, serves customers with a practiced bow. You're surrounded by the town's upper-crust merchants in fur-trimmed cloaks, a lady with a jeweled brooch, and a clerk flashing a silver ring. The air smells of cinnamon and cloves, not the pottage-soaked haze of the market's heart. Noble snacks weren't just food, they were power plays. Historians know that medieval elites used lavish feasts to flex wealth, as seen in 14th century banquet records like the Menagerie de Paris, which lists dishes like swan pasties. Here, the snacks are smaller but scream privilege, a far cry from the peasant's masseline or pottage. You pop your candied fruit, a preserved plum glazed with honey and ginger, its cloying sweetness a shock after the pottage's sludge. The stall's offerings dazzle, comfits, sugar-coated seeds like medieval candy, marzipan, almond paste shaped into tiny roses, and Dario-less, custard tarts spiced with saffron, glowing like gold. You spot hypocrisy cakes, biscuits soaked in spiced wine, pricier than a week's worth of pottage. A quirky tidbit, nobles ate. Subtleties, edible sculptures of sugar or pastry, often shaped like castles, to our guests. You eye a tiny marzipan tower, wondering if it's art or snack, and stick to your plum. Historians still argue whether subtleties were pure decadence, or a clever way to flaunt trade connections. The crowd savors each bite like a performance. You watch a lady nibble a comfit, her fingers dainty, while a merchant pops a Dario, boasting of his spice shipments. These snacks cost more than a peasant's daily wage, yet they're still junk food, quick, indulgent, meant to impress. You compare them to the market's fare, crispels versus marzipan, pottage versus Darioles, small ale versus hypocras. The poor ate to live, the rich ate to shine. You feel out of place, you're plumb a cheap pass to this world, but the vendor's nod says your coin spends as well as any. You recall the pottage stall's hollow eyes and feel the gap, same town, different lives. The risks aren't gone, even here. You spot a lead-glazed tray holding comfits, its poison a silent threat like the pottage cauldrons. Hygiene's better servants sweep crumbs, and flies are fewer, but the market's open ditches lurk nearby. Spices might mask spoiled nuts or rancid custard, and you wonder if wealth buys safety or just fancier regrets. A clerk sneezes, his tartlet crumbling, and you dodge a shard, hoping your plum's safe. Spoiled noble snacks, like peasant meat, could sicken saffron didn't hide everything. Joke number 1. Nobles eat marzipan castles. Peasants eat dirt. Guess who's got better odds? The stall's a social stage, grander than the alehouse's din. You overhear a merchant seal a deal over hypocras cakes, while a lady gossips about a rival's feast, her comfort uneaten. No crude graffiti here, just a carved falcon crest on the counter, a nod to noble pride. The vendor's boy, dressed in cloth finer than your cloak, polishes trays, eyeing the silver piling up. Nobles snacked here to be seen, their treats a public boast, unlike the peasants' quiet pottage bowls. You think of the Sabura's elite dormice, a Roman echo of this excess, and marvel at how wealth turns food into theater. The stall's luxury isn't just for banquets, it's here, in the market's heart, where nobles slum for the thrill. You finish your plum, its pit sticky in your mouth, and realize these delicacies, like pulse or crisp bells, are junk foods sold quick, shared, human, just wrapped in silk. The market's pulse beats around your pottage simmers, pork sizzles but your candied fruit lingers, a taste of privilege in the muck. As you move on, the health risks of this greasy medieval diet loom, a shadow waiting in every bite. Joke number 2. Forget fine dining, even nobles grab snacks with sticky fingers. The market's chaos wraps you, its noble stall a fleeting glimpse of wealth. You've slurped pottage with peasants, now tasted candy with lords, but hunger unites them in the same gritty square. You wipe your hands on your cloak, blending into the crowd, and feel like a true townsfolk, caught between grit and glory. The Sabura's garum nobile feels like a cousin, but these comforts are medieval, bold, fleeting, divisive. Joke number 3. In medieval markets, nobles eat sugar, peasants eat pulsbath, pray their teeth survive. You step away from the noble's gilded stall, the candied plum's cloying sweetness still lingering on your tongue, and plunge back into the market's muddy bustle. The crowd jostles you, their cloaks stained with pottage and ale, and a sudden twinge in your gut reminds you that medieval junk food pools, skewers, crispuscombs with a cost. You're wading into the health risks of this greasy, grit-filled diet, where every bite could spark a stomachache, a sour burp, or worse. You pause near a pottage stall, its cauldron steaming temptingly, and brace for the digestive perils that haunted every medieval townsfolk, from peasants slurping gruel to nobles nibbling comfits. The market's chaos feels heavier now, as you notice a man doubled over near a meat stall, clutching his belly after a skewer. Medieval diets were rough, and sanitation made them rougher. Historians know that poor food and hygiene fueled rampant illness, with texts like the 14th century Regiment's Sanitatis warning of ailments from bad meat, diarrhea, fevers, even worms. You eye your imaginary scran bag, where crumbs of maslin and risole lurk, and wonder if they're safe. The pottage stall's vendor ladles slurry with a grimy hand, and flies buzz over the cauldron, a grim echo of the alehouse's murky tankards. Open ditches snake through the market, their stench mingling with sizzling fat, and well water, often near latrines, was a gamble at best. You recall the lead-glazed pots from the bakery and alehouse, spotting one here, its contents bubbling with a metallic sheen. Lead was everywhere, cooking pots, ale jugs, even nobles' comfort trays leaching into food and drink. A quirky tidbit, some townsfolk drank posset A medicinal ale with lead-sweetened herbs, thinking it cured stomach woes, but it often worsened them. You rub your gut, hoping your small ale skipped the pasta treatment, and wince at the thought of lead in your pottage. Historians still argue whether lead poisoning was a medieval epidemic, or just one of many ways to feel lousy after lunch. The food itself was a hazard. You pass a meat stall, its skewers glistening but grayish, likely stretched with offal or left too long in the heat, like the hedgehog you dodged. Spoilage was common. Vendors masked rancid pork with vinegar, and pottage hid moldy grains or weevils. Maslin loaves, like yours, grew green in damp hovels, and crisp bells could harbor rancid honey or stale nuts. Parasites were a silent plague. Archaeological latrines revealed tapeworm eggs from bad pork or water, a risk in every market bite. You think of the rissole's gristle and pray it was just fat. A woman nearby retches, her bowl of pottage dropped, and you hope it's bad ale, not worms. Joke number 1. In medieval markets, a stomachache's the warm-up desserts a week praying to St. Cuthbert. The market's eaters seem undeterred, scarfing pasties and ale as if sickness were just another market day. You watch a laborer dunk bread in pottage, crumbs feeding rats, while a kid munches a crisple, honey smearing his face. The poor had no choice. Hunger trumped caution, and pottage was often their only shield. Nobles weren't immune. Their darioless or comfits, rich with cream or nuts, spoiled fast without cooling, and spices didn't always hide rot. You spot a vendor selling cures, herbs, vinegar, even ale as medicine, but his shifty grin screams quack. The Sabura's lead pots and flies feel like kin, but medieval risks were raw open sewers, no boiling, just grit and hope. The environment doubled the danger. You weave past a ditch, its stench a punch to the nose, and see flies hop from waste to a bread pile. Wells near latrines bred disease, and cooking fires smoked more than they cleaned. You recall the regiment's sanitatus's advice: eat lightly, avoid grease. Good luck in this market, where every stall tempts with fat and spice. Your candied plum feels risky now. Honey might hide mold, and sugar didn't kill germs. Teeth suffered too. The maslin's grit, like pottage's pebbles, wore enamel to stubs, as digs of medieval skulls show. Joke number 2. In medieval towns, fresh food means the flies got first pick, not you. Despite the risks, the market thrives. You watch a tanner gulp ale, a girl share a pasty, and a vendor hawk sausages, all shrugging off the odds. Food was life, even if it cut it short. Graffiti on a stall reads, "Eat today, pray tomorrow," a town mantra. You pass an alehouse, its tankards clinking, and a sweet stall with leche cakes, but your gut's warning steers you toward the festival feasts ahead, where food turns to frenzy. The crowd's resilience is riding wasn't just survival. It was defiance against the town that broke the weak. The market's muck clings to your boots, but its pulse wraps you tight. You realize medieval junk food greasy, risky, shared was the town's heartbeat, fueling every step through hunger and harm. You dodge a pig rooting through crumbs and nod at a kid who's snagged a risole. This is medieval life, gritty, stubborn, human, a taste of courage in every chancy bite. The Sabura's pulse eaters would nod, but this market's perils are its own. Joke number 3. Forget food safety. In medieval markets, you're winning if your lunch doesn't send you to the healer's hut. You push through the market's gritty bustle, the candied plum's sticky sweetness fading as a sudden roar of laughter and clinking tankards pulls you toward a torchlit plaza. Stalls overflow with sizzling sausages, steaming pottage, and honey-drizzled crisp bells, while townsfolk dance, shout, and feast under a starlit sky. This is a medieval feast day, a wild explosion of junk food and joy that transforms the market into a chaotic banquet. You grab a skewer of pork, its grease warm in your hand, and dive into the frenzy, where food becomes a shared celebration, fueling a town unhinged by festival fever. The plaza's a whirlwind of color and noise. Vendors hawk snacks, fiddlers scrape lively tunes, and jugglers toss apples to raucous cheers. You're swept into a crowd of cloaks and kirtles, some patched from daily toil, others dyed bright for the occasion. Feast days like Michaelmas, Midsummer, or St. John's Eve turned the town upside down, with peasants feasting like lords and ale flowing freely. Historians know these festivals as medieval safety valves, easing social tensions to prevent unrest, as documented in 14th century church records urging lords to fund charity feasts. The chronicler Froissart described such days as gluttonous riots of glee. And you feel it now: pork stalls groan under whole roasts, bread baskets empty in moments, and ale barrels gush like springs. Your skewer, spiced with costly pepper and herbs, is a feast day special, juicier than the market's usual hedgehog mystery meat. You bite in, grease dripping down your chin, and dodge a drunk who spills Bragathony spiked ale in your cloak. Food here is cheap or free, often bankrolled by lords, guilds, or churches to curry favor or appease the masses. You spot rissoles, plump with minced pork, lucanique sausages laced with sage, and pandamain fine white bread, not the gritty maslin snatched by eager hands. A vendor tosses crisp bells to a gaggle of kids, who scramble, honey smearing their faces like war paint. A quirky tidbit: during Lammas, townsfolk ate harvest cakes, bread loaves shaped like wheat sheaves, believed to ensure bountiful crops. You grab one, its crust sweet with a dab of honey, and wonder if it's magic or just a baker's ploy. Historians still argue whether harvest cakes held spiritual weight or were a clever way to sell surplus dough. The feast food is a step above the market's norm: spices like cinnamon or cloves, usually noble, flavor common snacks, and meats abundant, not stretched with offal or gristle. You see a stall carving a roasted boar, its crackling skin shared with the crowd, a rare treat for those used to pottage's sludge. Ale flows in river: small ale for most, braggart or spiced hypocras for those flashing silver. You snag a tankard of small ale, its sour bite cutting through the pork's richness, and join a group cheering a fire-eater whose flames light up the plaza. The market's risk flies, lead-glazed pots persist. You spot a lead jug on a stall, its poison a silent guest like the pottage cauldrons, and flies buzz over a pile of rissoles. But the crowd's too merry to care, their joy drowning the danger. Joke number 1. Feast day food's so good, you forget the flies until they're your side dish. The plaza's a social cauldron, blending classes in a way the market stalls rarely do, much like the Sabura's wild Saturnalia. You watch a merchant, his fine cloak askew, share a pandamain loaf with a laborer, their laughter slurred by ale. A peasant girl, crowned with daisies for midsummer, munches a rissole beside a guild master, her grin as bold as a knight's. Food fuels this unity: bread, meat, sweets passed hand to hand, turning strangers into revelers. Graffiti on a stall reads, "All feast, none fast," next to a crude boar sketch, a festival cry that echoes the town's defiance. You overhear gossip about a priest caught swiping pasties, his piety no match for hunger, and laugh, realizing feast days let secrets spill as freely as the ale. But excess carries a cost. You notice a man retching behind a stall, his feast day bounty rebelling, and recall the market's health risk: spoiled pork, lead-laced ale, rancid honey and crisp bells. Feast food, richer than pottage or maslin, strained stomachs and used to grease or spice, and bad water from nearby wells could sicken a crowd. You sip your ale cautiously, dodging a floating speck, and think of the rissole's gristle, praying it's not hedgehog. Parasites from undercooked meat or fly-tainted sweets were a hidden plague, yet the crowd feasts on, hunger trumping caution. Joke number 2. On feast days, your stomach's either singing with joy or praying for mercy, usually both. The night's rhythm is infectious: drums thump, fiddles wail, and feet stomp in drunken reels that churn the plaza's muck. You finish your skewer, licking grease from your fingers, and grab a crispel from a passing vendor, its honey a sweet nod to the stall you visited earlier. Feast days were the market's junk food zenith, where food became celebration, not mere survival. You see a vendor toss harvest cakes to the crowd, shouting, "For St. Michael," and feel the town's heartbeat: wild, messy, alive. The Sabura's festival echoes linger, but this plaza's medieval raw, communal, fleeting. As you sway with the revelers, the feast's glow wraps you like a warm cloak. Food wasn't just sustenance, it was the town's soul, binding strangers in every sticky, greasy bite. You moved deeper into the market, the plaza's din softening, and wonder, did knights, the town's armored heroes, scarf these same festival snacks? The scent of pottage lingers, but the feast's joy carries you forward, a bright spark in the market's muck. You dodge a kid chasing a stray risole and grin, feeling the town's pulse in every chaotic bite. Joke number 3, forget nobles. On feast days, the real hero's the one who keeps their crispel out of the mud. You sway away from the feast day's torchlit plaza, the crispel's honeyed warmth fading as you slip back into the market's quieter, muddy lanes. The din of fiddles and drunken reels softens, but the scents of pottage, pork, and ale linger, tying every stall to the town's beating heart. As you munch a stray crust plucked from a passing baker's cart, you realize medieval junk food pools, risoles, small ale wasn't just fuel. It was the glue binding townsfolk, from peasants to peddlers, in shared bites and greasy grins. You pause near an alehouse, its tankards clinking softly, and sink into the social magic of these quick meals, where food forged connections in a town of strangers. The market's glow is gentler now, its stalls winding down under a starlit sky. You lean against a cart, chewing your crust, its grit a familiar echo of the maslin you ate days ago. Food here was a unifier, leveling a town split by class and craft. Historians know communal eating was central to medieval life, with texts like the 14th century Ménagier de Paris praising shared meals for building trust across divides. You recall the feast day's chaos, where merchants and laborers broke bread together, and see it here a weaver splits a pasty with a tanner, their chatter cutting through the dusk. The Sabura's pulse sharers feel like kin, but this market's bonds are medieval gritty, fleeting, raw. You bite your crust, its sourness waking you, and watch the alehouse crowd. A freedman dunks bread and pottage, joking with the alewife, while a widow shares a risole with her neighbor, their smiles soft. These stalls were the town's hearths, where gossip, deals, and friendships brewed over quick bites. A quirky tidbit, some alehouses had. Talking benches, rough planks where regulars swapped tales, like medieval barstools. You imagine squeezing onto one, your ale cooling as you trade market rumors. Historians still argue whether these benches fostered community, or just gave idlers a perch to dodge work. The market's food was democratic, unlike its rigid guilds or lords. You recall the pottage stall's hollow-eyed crowd, the nobles' comfits, the feast's free-for-all same town, same hunger. Stalls didn't care about your rank. A penny or barter got you a meal. You spot a man trading a worn knife for a sausage, his grin triumphant, and a kid snatching crumbs from a dropped leche. Food sparked Kinessa vendor tosses a burnt crust to a beggar. A carpenter shares his ale with a stranger. Graffiti on a stall reads, "Bread for all," a plea etched beside a crude tankard sketch. Joke number 1. In medieval markets, love's cheap, but a free risole's true romance. The risks you've faced lead pots, flies, spoiled meat-bound eaters too, in shared survival. You watch a laborer cough after a pottage slurp, his mate patting his back, and realize sickness was a market constant, weathered together. Stalls were where townsfolk faced life's edges: hunger, illness, hope. You pass a meat stall, its brazier dim, and hear a vendor's cry, "Last pasties, fresh as dawn!" The crowd chuckles, knowing fresh is a stretch, but buys anyway. Food's trust, however shaky, held the town together. You recall the feasts. All feast, none fast. Graffiti and smile, picturing bonds forged over spilled ale, much like the Sabura's tavern debts. Food's social power wasn't just in eating but in sharing, haggling, joking, passing bowls. You see a woman teach her kid to barter for a crispel, her voice firm but fond, and a group of weavers swap tales over sausages, their hands greasy. These moments, fleeting as torchlight, built the town's heart. You think of the grain dole feeding pottage pots, the feast shared pandemane, and realize junk food was the town's equalizer, turning strangers into neighbors, if only for a bite. The small ale's sour tang lingers in your memory, a liquid thread tying every meal. Joke number 2. A full belly's nice, but a shared crisp makes you kin in this mock. The market's rhythm slows vendors pack up, but alehouses glow on. You notice a man carving graffiti. Market feeds, market lives, and feel its truth. Food stalls were the town's pulse, fueling bodies and bonds. You finish your crust, its grit grounding you, and we've passed a pottage stall, its cauldron cooling. The market's chaos feels like home now, its greasy connections wrapping you tight. You recall the Sabura's street eaters, united by pulse, and see the same spirit here, in every past loaf or stolen risole. The town's food was its soul, shared in every hurried, sticky bite. As you move deeper into the market, the alehouse's glow fades, and a new question tugs. Did knights, the town's armored champions, scarf these same market snacks? The scent of roasted pork lingers, but the market's social hum carries you forward, a warm spark in the dusk. You dodge a kid chasing a stray leche and grin, feeling the town's pulse in every chaotic bite. The Sabura's globuli sharers would nod, but this market's bonds are its own raw, stubborn, human. Joke number 3. Forget fame. In medieval markets, you're nobody till you've spilled ale on your cloak. You drift away from the alehouse's fading clatter, the crust's gritty chew still lingering as you weave through the market's dimming lanes. The crowd thins, but a distant roar cheers, hoofbeats, the clang of steel pulls you toward the town's edge, where a tourney field hums with anticipation. Did knights, medieval Europe's armored heroes, fuel their justs and sword fights with the same junk food you've scarfed pottage, risoles, small ale? You pause near a stall selling pasties, their steam rising in the dusk, and grab one, its warmth grounding you as you dive into the diets of these battlefield legends. Knights were the town's shining stars, and you're about to uncover if their meals match the market's greasy grit. The stall's quiet, its vendor a grizzled man tending a small brazier, his eyes on the tourney's distant glow. You lean against a cart, biting into your pasty pork and onion, spiced with pepper, a cut above the pottage's sludge. Knights didn't dine in market muck, but their food wasn't always the nobles' comforts you tasted. Historians know that knights, often landless younger sons or retainers, ate hearty, practical meals to sustain grueling training, as noted in 14th century household accounts like those of the Earl of Lancaster. These records list knights' diets heavy on bread, meat, and ale, not far from the market's fare. Your pasty feels like a knight's quick bite, snatched between drills, but you wonder if they crave the crisp spells you loved. You chew, the pastry flaking, and picture a knight's camp kitchen. Their staple was bread, like the maslin or finer cheat, dunked in pottage or meat broth, not unlike the alehouse's offerings. Meat, pork, mutton, or game was common, grilled or stewed, closer to your skewer than the noble's swan. Ale was their drink, small ale like yours, though wealthier knights sipped wine or hippocras. A quirky tidbit, knights ate sops, bread soaked in broth or ale, to soften stale loaves and boost energy before combat. You eye your pasties crust, glad it's not sopped in ditch water, and hope knights dodge that fate. Historians still argue whether sops were a knight's staple or just a way to use up old bread. The market's food ties you to these warriors. You pass a pottage stall, its cauldron steaming, and imagine knights grabbing a bowl after sparring, their armor clanking. Their diet wasn't Levishno marzipan towers or practical, like the market's rissoles or sausages. Archaeological digs at castle sites reveal nightly kitchen scraps, pork bones, barley, fish matching the market's cheap eats. You spot a vendor selling ale-soaked bread, a nod to sops, and realize knights likely spiced their pottage with market-bought pepper or herbs, just as you did with your skewer. Your pasty's peppery kick feels like a small salute to their grit, a taste of the market they passed through. The risks you faced: lead pots, flies, spoiled meat were theirs too. You notice the vendor's brazier, a lead pan catching drippings, its poison a silent threat like the alehouse's jugs. Knights ate from similar pots in camp, their pottage or meat cooked in kitchens no cleaner than the market stalls. Parasites from bad pork, like those haunting your risole, plagued them, and gritty flour wore their teeth, just as your maslin did. Spoiled food or bad water could fell a night before a lance did, yet they ate on, facing tourneys with full bellies and steel hearts. Joke number 1. Knights ate pottage to face dragons. You eat it, and pray for a nap. The market's social glue touched knights too. You watch a laborer share a pasty, his grin echoing the camaraderie of knightly camps, where men broke bread before battle, like the feast days shared pandemane. Graffiti on a stall reads, "Lance and loaf," a knightly boast beside a crude shield sketch, proof of their fame. Knights were fed better than peasants, their lords investing in their strength, but their meals mirrored the market spread, meat, ale, no frills. You imagine a knight sneaking a crisp at a feast, honey on his gauntlet hands, and smile at the thought of these heroes craving the market's sweets, just as you did. The stall's brazier dims, its vendor packing up as the tourney's cheers fade. You finish your pasty, wiping grease on your cloak, and feel a kinship with those warriors. Their diet wasn't the market's feast, but it shared its soul, cheap, gritty, human. You pass an alehouse, its small ale still flowing, and think of knights toasting victories with tankards like yours. The market fed the town's heart, from plowmen to paladins, and you're woven into it now. As you move deeper into the lanes, the scent of fresh bread wafts from a bakery, pulling you toward the legacy of medieval junk food. Joke number 2. Knights ate sops to fight foes. You eat pasties and fight flies. The market's muck clings to your boots, but its pulse wraps you tight. You realize knights, like you, live bite by bite, their strength forged in the same stalls you've roamed. The Sabura's gladiators, fueled by barley, would nod, but these knights are medieval armored, bold, hungry. You dodge a kid chasing a stray risole and grin, feeling the town's life in every bite. Joke number 3. Forget glory. A knight's real win was a pasty without a side of ditch water. You wander away from the knight's imagined camp, the pasty's peppery warmth fading as you slip through the market's quieting lanes. The flicker of torches dims, and the scents of pottage, risoles, and small ale linger, tying every stall to the town's pulsing heart. As you brush a crumb from your cloak, you realize this medieval junk food pulls, crisp bells, greasy skewers wasn't just a meal. It's shaped a legacy that echoes in today's food trucks and burger joints. You pause at a final stall, its brazier barely glowing, and grab a pandemane loaf, its crust soft and faintly sweet. Biting into it, you trace the market's fast food influence across centuries, feeling history in every chewy, gritty bite. The market's glow is a whisper now, its vendors packing up under a starlit sky. You lean against a cart, chewing your loaf, and watch a laborer haul a sack of barley, his silhouette timeless. Medieval junk food was a blueprint for urban life, feeding townsfolk through muck and hunger. Historians know that market stalls and alehouses, like those in 14th century London or York, inspired later food cultures, from Renaissance taverns to modern street carts, as seen in guild records tracking vendor licenses. The chronicler John Gower called markets the belly of the town, and you see these stalls fed thousands, their model spreading across Europe. Your pandemane, a finer cousin to the maslin, feels like the ancestor of pizza or pretzels, a quick bite still ruling our late-night cravings. You tear off a piece, its soft crumb a luxury after gritty pulse, and think of the market's reach. Alehouses, with their steaming pottage and rissoles, were medieval diners, their grab-and-go style reborn in today's kebab stands or taco trucks. Pottage's hearty mush lives in soups and stews, from minestrone to ramen, warming bellies worldwide. Crisp bells begot donuts, rissoles foreshadowed sliders, and small ales sour kick echoes in craft beers at food festivals. A quirky tidbit, some medieval vendors used portable griddles, like ancient food carts, to chase crowds at fairs or tourneys, a trick mirrored by today's roving ice cream vans. You smile, picturing a market hawker parked outside a modern stadium. Historians still argue whether this fast food culture spread through trade or just rode the wave of growing towns. The market's legacy isn't just culinary, it's social. You recall the alehouse's talking benches, the feast days' shared pandemane, and the night's camp sops. Medieval junk food built community, a model for today's food trucks where strangers swap stories over falafel or fries. You watch a kid snatch a crumb from the muck, his grin echoing the market's hungry yum, and feel the timeless pull of food. The risks lead pots, flies, spoiled meat haven vanished. We've traded them for preservatives and health codes, but the spirit's the same. Your pandemane is a bridge to now. It's true a taste of the market's raw humanity, much like the Sabura's panis vocacious. The stall's brazier sputters, and you finish your loaf, crumbs dusting your cloak. The market's lane's empty, but its essence lingers greasy, loud, alive. You think of burger runs, taco carts, and pizza slices grabbed on city corners, all born from stalls like these. The market fed medieval Europe, and its echo feeds us still, in every quick, messy bite. Joke number 1. The market gave us fast food. We added napkins and regret progress, right? You wander past a pottage stall, its cauldron cold, and an alehouse with tankards stacked for dawn. The market's influence is everywhere. Every food stall, every diner carries its DNA. You recall the pulse vendor's weary crowd, the noble's comfits, the knight's sops, and realize food was the town's heartbeat, then and now. You toss a crumb to a stray dog, who snaps it up, and laugh at the cycle: hunger, survival, connection. The market's junk food was its story, written in grease and grit, and you've tasted every page. The market's quiet now, but you feel its legacy in your full belly. Food trucks, chip shops, even that late-night kebab stand theory, all market kin, born from this muddy square. You wipe your hands, blending into the night, and see the market's glow in every modern street eats sizzle. The Sabura's pizza roots nod in agreement, but this market's legacy is medieval, bold, communal, enduring. You dodge a kid chasing a stray risole and grin, feeling history in every bite. Joke number 2, forget castles. The market's real gift was the art of eating in the muck. As you linger, the market's warmth wraps you like a worn cloak. You've slurped its pottage, savored its crisp bells, and dodged its flies, each bite a tale of resilience and joy. Medieval junk food wasn't just food, it was life, shared in every hurried, sticky moment, from pulse to food trucks. The stars above seem to wink, and you wonder what the market's next bite would taste like. Joke number 3. In medieval markets, every meal was junk. Today, we call it comfort food. The market's muddy lanes dissolve, their smoky stalls fading into a soft, distant hum, leaving only the gentle echo of a bustling medieval town. You're back in your quiet space now, the fans lower weaving a soothing lullaby that wraps you like a warm, worn cloak. The flicker of torches, the clatter of wooden bowls, and the laughter of feast day revelers drift away, softening into a dreamlike haze. Medieval junk food, gritty pottage simmering in cauldrons, greasy rissoles sizzling on braziers, sweet crisp bells dripping with honey lingers in your memory, each bite a story of hunger, heart, and resilience. Let the market's glow cradle you, its chaos melting into a peaceful stillness, like embers cooling under a starlit sky. You've walked its cobblestones, tasted its ale, and shared its bread with strangers, every moment a thread in the town's timeless tapestry. Now, release the weight of those bustling streets. Let the scent of roasted pork and yeasty loaves fade into a gentle whisper. Sink deeper into your rest, carried by the market's warmth, where every stall was a hearth, every meal a bond. The town's pulse slows, its voices hush, and the night enfolds you in a tender embrace, promising dreams as rich as a feast day banquet. Drift off, wanderer, with the market's flavors lingering on your tongue, a quiet song of survival and joy. Sleep deep, nestled in the echo of a town that lived through every bite, its heart beating softly in your dreams.